When Thomas saw his new wife's dark, coarse chest hair, he couldn't believe his eyes. He picked up the oil lamp on the table, held it closer, and after a thorough look, realized it was all real. In the warm glow of the lamp, even the stubble on her chin stood out clearly. He reached out, trying to wipe it away with some saliva, but the hair on her cheeks didn't budge. Only then did he understand he had been deceived in this marriage. Every day Margaret had to shave like a man, covering her face in soap and scraping away every trace of hair just to appear normal and blend in with society. She'd kept the secret her entire life until she met Thomas. Margaret's father saw that Thomas was drowning in debt, so he offered a dowry of $15,000 to marry off his daughter. Eager to pay off his creditors, Thomas agreed without hesitation. The first time Thomas met Margaret, he was actually a bit excited. After all, he was in his 40s, no longer young, and due to an old war injury, he couldn't do heavy labor. He made a modest living running a small cafe in his hometown of Cedar Falls, Iowa. As soon as he got the dowry, Thomas used it to clear his debts. The very next day, accompanied by her father, Margaret married Thomas in a simple ceremony. To the outside world, they looked like a perfect couple, drawing envy from many. But as soon as the wedding ended, Margaret's father announced he was leaving. Margaret ran after him, begging him to stay a few more days. But her father simply said, "This is a woman's fate," and walked away. Left behind, Margaret stood alone, nervous and afraid. That night, when Thomas saw Margaret's chest hair, he finally realized the truth. He'd been tricked. He couldn't handle it. He left her behind and spent the night alone in the cafe. The next day, Margaret found Thomas, who was still in shock, and tried to explain. She told him she had tried everything as a child to fix her condition, but nothing ever worked. Her father used to hide her away, afraid others would find out she had hair all over her body. But Thomas didn't buy it. He felt betrayed. He called them both liars and told Margaret to leave. At that moment, some friends dropped by. Margaret, as the lady of the house, politely got up to greet them. Her calm, graceful manners impressed the guests. But even that wasn't enough to change Thomas's mind. That evening, Margaret came to the cafe and said she was the one who should be sleeping there. Despite her efforts to show care and concern, Thomas kept busy with his chores, saying nothing. Bored, Margaret reached for a nearby book, but Thomas snatched it away. All he wanted was a real woman, something simple. Margaret felt deeply hurt and humiliated. Later, under the weight of everyone's stares, she walked alone into the wilderness. That night, she didn't come home. She spent the night outside by herself. Meanwhile, Thomas went into her room and opened her book. Inside, he saw pictures and stories about women with excessive body hair. Only then did he realize Margaret wasn't the only one like this. The next day, a friend showed up holding Margaret's handkerchief. He'd found it near the bridge by the old mill ruins. Thomas rushed there, finding Margaret looking worn and exhausted. With nowhere else to go, she reluctantly followed him home. That night, Margaret reached for her razor again, an old habit she couldn't break. She knew this painful condition would stay with her for life. Later, she caught a glimpse of Thomas paying back his debts, finally realizing he'd been under immense pressure. One day, while chatting with customers, Margaret noticed a newspaper story. It featured a bearded lady performing at the traveling circus. Each ticket sold for $4. The story attracted huge crowds, people curious to see this unusual performer. Meanwhile, Thomas's cafe had barely any customers, and the debt still hung over their heads. So Margaret made a decision. During a casual conversation, she brought up the article and made a bold bet with two men. She said she could grow a beard just like the woman in the paper. Thomas overheard the bet and was furious. He dragged her outside, demanding to know why she would do such a thing. Margaret explained she was only trying to help. Business was bad, and she just wanted to earn more money for them. Thomas had no words. He couldn't stop her, not with all the debt on his back. But still, he refused to share a bed with her. Instead, he went to the red light district to vent his frustrations, avoiding Margaret at all costs. Gossip about their rocky relationship soon spread across the small town. Thomas feared that if people discovered Margaret's secret, she'd become a laughingstock. A month flew by. People who had heard about the bet started showing up at the cafe. When they saw Margaret's full beard, even Thomas was stunned. He begged her to stop, but she insisted on facing the crowd. As she stepped outside, the room went quiet. The two men who had made the bet were shocked. They couldn't believe it was real. One of them stepped forward, touched the beard, and praised her beauty. He meant it. It was the first time in Margaret's life someone had genuinely complimented her. Even the curious women standing outside were invited in. They didn't mock or ridicule, just showed a bit of curiosity. Things hadn't gone the way Thomas feared. The woman he had once resented didn't become a joke. She became something more. After that day, Margaret began to accept herself. She stopped shaving. With her confidence and business sense, the cafe became a local sensation. She helped Thomas pay off all his debts and even suggested renovating the place. But Thomas was still uneasy. He said, "The customers only come here because they're curious about your beard." Sensing his anxiety, Margaret reached for his hand. She asked if he was ashamed of her. Thomas replied, "People will get bored of it soon." While Thomas was still stuck in doubt, Margaret was already planning their future with enthusiasm. She hired a photographer, took portraits, and started selling them like postcards. They sold like crazy, and business boomed even more. Of course, there were troublemakers. One day, a burly factory foreman teased Thomas, asking what it felt like to live with a freak. Thomas snapped. He threw the man out of the cafe, but the foreman kept yelling insults at Margaret. Furious, Thomas tackled him to the ground and gave him a brutal beating that finally shut the man up. But the fight triggered Thomas's old war injury. As Margaret helped him remove his back brace, he asked her to shave off her beard. Margaret didn't answer. Instead, she focused on gathering herbs from the forest to help him heal. One day, the factory owner came in complaining that Margaret had been selling alcohol to his workers, hurting productivity. Margaret calmly replied, "This is just a place to relax and chat. I never forced anyone." With nothing to gain, the factory boss stormed out. The crowd admired her grace and strength. With her sharp instincts, Margaret turned her portraits into postcards, bringing in even more income. The photographer admired her too. He encouraged her to explore the world beyond the cafe. Margaret could tell his assistant had feelings for her, but she knew she was already married. She kept those thoughts to herself. Meanwhile, Thomas began to care for her again. He'd sneak into the room at night, gently stroking her while she slept, but the moment she stirred, he quickly backed away. Still deep down, he knew he wasn't ready to fully accept her. That day, Margaret spent time chatting with a neighbor by the river. She didn't go to the cafe at all. When she returned home in the evening, Thomas asked where she had been. But instead of answering directly, Margaret gave him a clear signal. She wanted to become a real wife to him. Yet, no matter how hard she tried, Thomas always backed off at the very last moment. Margaret's eyes were filled with disappointment at her husband's attitude. That same day, a woman from the brothel, someone Thomas used to see, came looking for him. As she watched Margaret, full of life and energy, her eyes burned with jealousy. She even walked over to Margaret and exchanged a few words before walking off. Margaret instantly recognized the hat on the woman's head. It was one of Thomas's creations, but she chose not to expose it. After all, Thomas had witnessed her sharing an intimate moment with her assistant earlier in the day. That night, when Margaret returned home, Thomas's jealousy finally exploded. Margaret responded to his sarcasm with some of her own, but Thomas snapped. He accused her of having no dignity, claiming she would do anything for money. He brought up the past again, saying Margaret had deceived him before marriage, turning his once good reputation into a laughingstock. To him, even though Margaret gave him financial freedom, he could never fully accept her because of her body. At that moment, Margaret's heart shattered. She had sacrificed so much only to receive ridicule and contempt in return. With no one to confide in, Margaret turned to a photographer, asking him to take bold and provocative pictures of her. She took off her coat and revealed her long, striking legs. What she didn't realize was that these daring photos would later drag her into a dark abyss. Margaret's unique beauty caught the attention of the factory owner. He showed her the photos and took the opportunity to confess his interest in her. But Margaret, flatly rejected him. The man felt humiliated, and in that moment, a seed of revenge began to grow in his heart. As he left, Thomas saw everything from a distance. That same night, the town's mill caught fire, destroying much of the stored grain. Because Margaret had been drinking with the girl who worked at the mill, the townspeople started blaming her too. Under the influence of gossip and rumors, even the priest began to believe Margaret was the cause of all this misfortune. He described her as a menace, turning her into a complete outcast. Someone even smashed the cafe's windows with rocks, posting one of her photos on the door with the words, "Closed for good." The townspeople gathered and surrounded Margaret. A man stepped forward to publicly denounce her. Margaret tried to defend herself, but another woman grabbed her arms and held her back. Thomas, trying to help, was also pinned to the ground by a group of men. Then the woman took out a pair of scissors and slashed Margaret's forehead. Just as the situation spiraled out of control, the factory owner appeared. He stopped the chaos, but both Margaret and Thomas knew he was the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. Thomas called for a doctor to treat Margaret. After examining her, the doctor told Thomas that due to a hormone imbalance, Margaret, despite being biologically female, couldn't have children. After learning the truth about her condition, Margaret walked to the river. She desperately tried to scrub away the hair on her body, hoping to become what she believed a normal woman should be. But it was all in vain. After everything that had happened, Thomas finally began to show Margaret some genuine care. He realized if a woman could love him so selflessly and he still couldn't appreciate it, then what kind of man was he really? To comfort Margaret, the two of them decided to adopt a child. They visited a convent and explained their situation. The nuns recommended a little girl. Surprisingly, the girl wasn't frightened by Margaret's unusual appearance. As they parted ways, the girl asked if Margaret would come to hear her sing at the upcoming charity event. Margaret agreed with a smile. Leaning against the wall, Thomas watched his wife light up with joy, and for the first time, he felt something stir inside him. He realized that he had fallen deeply for Margaret. It was this woman, this remarkable woman, who had pulled him out of despair and helped him rediscover his passion for life. Margaret gladly accepted Thomas's tenderness, and from that moment on, their bond only grew stronger. One day, they returned to the convent to finalize the adoption paperwork, but the head nun seemed uneasy. Sensing something was off, Thomas waited. Before the nun could even speak, the sound of footsteps echoed from outside. It was the factory owner, the man funding the convent. He walked in and handed the nun a folder, which contained Margaret's daring photos. Because of his interference, their adoption plan was completely ruined. Margaret was devastated. She had never imagined that her courage and independence would lead to such harsh judgment and exclusion. One morning, Margaret carefully cleaned herself up and put on her wedding dress. She walked to the church where the charity gala was taking place. She sat down right across from the factory owner, but she wasn't there for him. She was there because she had promised the little girl she'd come to hear her sing. When she looked at the girl on stage, Margaret's eyes welled up with tears of warmth and sadness. If it hadn't been for someone interfering, they would already be a family. After the performance, Margaret quietly left the church. As she stepped outside, Thomas, who had been searching for her, arrived just in time. Margaret looked at him one last time and suddenly collapsed to the ground. When Thomas noticed the marks on her wrist, he finally understood. Margaret had lost all hope for the world. He rushed her home. A nun helped bandage her wounds and shaved her face clean. Though the world rejected her defiance, Margaret still refused to give in. But when she woke up, she overheard a conversation between her father and Thomas. Her father had come to take her away, leaving this place. This cruel, judgmental place was probably best for both Margaret and Thomas. Angry and heartbroken, Margaret ran out the door. Thomas followed closely behind. They ended up at a bridge in the wilderness, standing at the edge. Margaret looked back at Thomas and, without hesitation, jumped. Thomas stood frozen for just a few seconds, then dove in after her. In the face of prejudice and condemnation, two people who truly loved each other chose to leave it all behind, to begin a new life together in a place free from judgment.